So this is part B of the Khoodeelaar diagnostic exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. Now this one, the Sunday Times has got a front page piece about Boris Johnson. It is supposed to be a cartoon. And the cartoon says, "I have united the kingdom. Everyone hates tears, Tiers." And then there is a kind of array of flying notes. One is headed Brexit, another is rebels, another PPE, another is Priti Patel, another test and trace, and the other is Scotland. It's a cartoon, appears to be by Newman, Newman's Week. And there is a piece about the London Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick, saying stop and search saves black lives. Now there is nothing in the Sunday Times that really talks about the actual evidence of the virus and the scientific evidence or anything else is and there is a follow-up on this billionaire kind of husband and his wife Tatiana Ahmedova. And the headline is, "Son tried to broker 100 million settlement in divorce battle." Hunkered down on his father's 350 million super yacht in Dubai, Temur Ahmedov, 27, is preparing to return to Britain to face his mother, Tatiana, in the High Court. He stands accused of acting as his father's agent by helping to spirit away assets owed to her in a 453 million divorce settlement. And there is a reference to divorce tourism, which is exactly what we have said about David Neuberg. Now, divorce tourism as the phrase being used here in this coverage of this case between the Ahmedov and the Tatiana, his wife, said that this Fiona Shackleton is no longer involved as a lawyer in this case. And it says, shortly after his meeting with Shackleton, who is no longer involved in the case, his father, that is Temur's father, Farhad, 65, sold his stake in a gas company for $1.4 billion in 2012. And Tatiana filed for divorce. In late 2016, the High Court awarded her a £453 million share of his fortune, and she entered into an arrangement with a litigation financier, which Farhad has said amounts to divorce tourism. Barford Capital agreed to underwrite her case in return for a share believed to be 30% of any award. So far, she has secured a dilapidated helicopter, but her ex-husband recently fought off a freezing order for the yacht. Farhad, who is Russian, does not recognize the jurisdiction of the court. Timur believes this eventually led his mother to take him to court. She told me many times, either you are on my side or you are not my son. He said, although she had shared some misgivings with him about proceeding, now she understood she's in too deeply. She's in too deep. In July, a judge froze Timur's assets of $120 million, including a £30 million flat in Knightsbridge, central London. His younger brother, Edgar, owns a smaller flat in the same block. His mother is not taking action against him. Timur does not consider her his mother anymore after what she has done. He said, it's a personal vendetta against me. They're trying to use me as a pressure point to my dad. I'm his elder son. On October 28, the High Court authorized a 10-hour search of his apartment. A court document said more than 80,000 documents had been discovered on 4 devices. Timur insists that he complied with the court order by sending devices by courier from France, and they went missing. He refused to pay £250,000 for the cost of the search. In a further blow, last week, a US court ordered Google to hand over his personal emails. Timur said he was saddened and disappointed to be treated like a criminal. He said of his mother, you have been fighting for 5 years. You have been fighting against the future generation. For what? So that is 2 bits of information. One is about the divorce tourism and this Barford Capital's involvement at the rate of 30% of the kind of awards. And the other is that on 4 devices, the search party found 80,000 documents. And we shall be talking about devices and the 80,000 documents in 4. So it's 20,000 documents per each device, depending on the size, the capacity of the storage. So if 20,000 documents are found in each device on average, then how many documents would that be? It depends on the storage, as I said. So if there are billions, like terabytes, there are devices with the capacity of terabytes, gigabytes and terabytes, then it's not 80,000. It will be 80 million or billions of documents. So that's the point we make here. In the context of the narrative on the claims against the Royal London Hospital, Tower Hamlets Council, and other criminals, including the Spitalfield Small Business Association and individuals associated with and holding positions in the Spitalfield Small Business Association at the time of the particular aspects of the crimes and wrongs and damages that they caused between the period January 2011 up to October 2012 and continuing. Now, none of the newspapers has got, as I said, any accountability issue or any topic of investigation into the absence of accountability or regulation. Absence of accountability warranted to be delivered by the local councils or the central government department or the Greater London Authority or the Mayor of London in the name of London or by any of the occupants in the elected posts of elected mayors. And that's not an accident. That is the norm, the complete silence by Fleet Street on the actual behavior and conduct and the impact of the behavior and the conduct of the entities, agencies, organizations of the state on behalf of the state. Now we go back to the case of the Ahmedabad, Tatiana Ahmedabad, her son, Timur Ahmed, and the ex-husband of Tatiana Ahmedabad himself. Now, the cases or the case have or has been described as forming part of the kind of cases that are taken up and kind of pushed as part of the divorced tourism. This is what we have said about David Neuberger, the former president of the UK Supreme Court, who made the statement in January 2017, the year he resigned or he left or retired as the first president of the UK Supreme Court. And as we have been saying, the Neuberger boast about Brexit. Remember, that was 2017, so just a few months after the Brexit kind of outcome of June 2016. So June, July, August, September, October, November, December, January, so 7 months. 7 months since Brexit, Neuberger was cajoled or coerced or in effect manipulated or lured or tempted into the propaganda kind of front operated by the Brexiteering government. Although Theresa May has been widely reported as having opposed Brexit, when in post as Prime Minister, she had no alternative but to do everything as a Brexiteer would do, and Brexiteers wanted her to do. So her de facto deputy, David Lidington, manipulated or, as I said, lured or effectively tempted David Neuberger to jump into the propaganda bandwagon for the Brexit cause. And as part of his role, Neuberger let slip what now appears to be let slip a confession, in effect. Confession to the fact that the high courts in London are the playgrounds, litigation playground for big moneyed criminals from the various parts of the world. Although Neuberger never said those words, what he did say amounted to that in the light of this latest confirmation of the divorce tourism that is going on. While the courts are accommodating big money criminals from abroad, they are obstructing real claims and litigants in person or otherwise seeking legitimate remedies for damages and wrongs and thefts that have been taking place in this country. So to recap again, this is in the context of our narrative being updated on the claims against the Royal London Hospital, Spitalfield Small Business Association, London Borough of Newham, and individuals involved in the Spitalfield Small Business Association and other criminally operated outfits in mounting and causing and carrying out and perpetrating the very serious damaging attacks on the Cat's House that took place on dates between January 2011 and October 2012. So these attacks took place with the collusion, complicity of the entirety of the regime in place during the calendar years of October 2010, in which month Luther Roman got in as the so-called elected mayor for the first time at Tower Hamlets. And Luther Roman continued to directly and indirectly collude with the criminals involved in the attacks on the Cat's House and all that entails. Now, the attack on the Cat's House had various aspects which we shall be detailing in parts. And Luther Roman, either in collusion with named or nameable or unnamed criminals operating in Tower Hamlets, both through the Tower Hamlets Council and outside from the strictly kind of official so-called demarcation and limits of Tower Hamlets Council, and from locations and through organizations and outfits and activities carried out from outside of the council. Now, we have studied the published accounts published by Price Waterhouse Cooper, and their published account lacks rigorous investigation and any reference to the various central issues which should have been examined, but which weren't examined, and which absence of examination by Price Waterhouse Cooper left the gaps about names, about the sums, about the details of the operation of the bribery and abuse. Bribery by the public money that belonged to the people of Tower Hamlets, and bribery of people whose role was the target or the focus or the reason for the bribery. That is to say, their role in getting Lutfur Rahman elected, or their role in getting Lutfur Rahman electoral benefits. And there are too many items in the Price Waterhouse kind of report, which is about 200 pages, A4. Although there are 200 pages, they are not accompanied by names, dates, and details of the financial abuse and other decisions that were made by Lutfur Rahman directly or in effect by his regime and by his order, by his purposes, by his aims and objects of procuring benefits in exchange for these decisions, the beneficial decisions benefiting the potential colluders and players in the clearly set game of procuring electoral benefit to the council's incumbent mayor, Lutfur Rahman. Now, there are very detailed references to several communications and repeated kind of references to items that were referred back and forth, but there is no real logical, evidential taking of these references to the logical final conclusions. And there is no reference to the duties of Tower Hamlets Council according to the various statutes and acts of parliament and in common law. And the absence of references to the duties of the council meant that there is absence of references to the discriminatory, negligent, corrupt, jealous, hateful, intentional, obstructive actions and omissions by Lutfur Rahman and by his kind of agents, either as elected kind of post holders as councillors or as agents operating as post holders, as paid employees in the council at the time. So that is the general summary of the Price Waterhouse Cooper kind of report, which was as we have said earlier in part A today, Sunday the 29th of November 2020. It was half done and half left incomplete. Now add this to the series of denials by the Metropolitan Police, the Crown Prosecution Service, and other so-called anti-crime kind of agencies making various statements, just like Price Waterhouse Cooper, that contain a lot of kind of words, but they don't actually refer to the actual behavior, either about the duties of the council or about the unpublicized de facto decisions made by Lutfur Rahman directly, personally, or made in his kind of regime by his order or to suit his agenda. So the PricewaterhouseCoopers has failed. The Metropolitan Police have expressly been allowed to stay unaccountable on their decisions not to prosecute on already known acts of criminality and abuse. And the court system was distorted and misrepresented the actual events into our hamlets, because the election court, chaired by the election commissioner, Richard Morey, were again behaved just as the PricewaterhouseCoopers report and its staff did, and the Metropolitan Police and their employees did, and the Crown Prosecution Service did. So what we are saying on the evidence is that although there were forums engaged in investigating the wrongdoing and the criminal abuse of the council's resources and the powers, they created separate shows, charades of doing the investigation. Well, they didn't do the investigation. So the purpose was to remove Lutfur Rahman from that post. And they didn't need, as the contents of the Richard Morey judgment dated the 23rd of April 2015 shows, Morey didn't have to kind of investigate any more than what he did, because he attached his findings and his conclusions to the limited number of acts of parliament, especially the 1983 Representation of the People Act and a few other items. Had Richard Morey investigated the criminality and the corruption, which he didn't investigate, had he investigated or subpoenaed evidence about the misconduct and abuse by Lutfur Rahman or by his agents or by his associates working formally in the council with him or informally in the council or in the borough, but outside of the council's kind of formal structure of employment, etc. Had Morey investigated those, he would have found not one, but dozens of instances of examples of criminality being done during those 6 calendar years. Well, during the period up to 23rd of April 2015, when Morey announced that Lutfur Rahman's election on the 22nd of May 2014 had been found to have been void. And he ordered the immediate removal of Lutfur Rahman from that post, which was done. But had Morey investigated the various reports and claims made before him during the hearing of the petition, had he investigated those rather than just referring to them in an oblique way, as he did in the report, he would have no alternative or option but to conclude that there were industrial scale of corruption and lying by Township Council regime, fronted by the elected mayor during the 6 calendar years, October 2010 till 23rd of April 2015. Now, events that have been reported later include the following. Although Lutfur Rahman made several attempts through the High Court to stage a challenge to Mori's findings and Mori's reports and Mori's order banning Lutfur Rahman for 5 years from public office, etc., etc. And Lutfur Rahman failed to get a single one of Mori's actions reversed by a single court order. What does it say? It says that Lutfur Rahman didn't stay silent and didn't reserve his options, but he actually went out and challenged everything that he could challenge. And he was denied any of the applications in the context of Mori's findings and Mori's decision. So what this says is the Township Council, as an elected council, was exposed openly in public by the election commissioner to the factual charge that it was headed by a post holder in the post of elected mayor who had been found to have used corrupt means to get elected in 2014. Now, as Mori referred to other items in the retrospect, and he ventured into commenting on the impact on the Bangladeshi community, he could have done the same thing about the systematic lying that was carried out by Township Council through employees and through the mayor's office, including Lutfur Rahman, making false statements, and Lutfur Rahman making false promises, and Lutfur Rahman making false, intentionally false, and misleading pledges. So therefore, what the Price Waterhouse report, Cooper report did, and what the Panorama program did, and what the Mori hearing did and the report did, all of those went in the direction of concluding in their particularly different kind of phrases and wordings and languages, whatever they concluded, that Lutfur Rahman had been engaged in corrupt behavior, abusive behavior. The Panorama did that, Price Waterhouse Cooper did that, and Mori's report did that. So if all of them did go in the same direction, how is it that the Metropolitan Police and the Crown Prosecution Service could not find evidence to prosecute? Now that is a question. That is a question that has to be kind of attached to the fact that despite being told repeatedly of the safeguarding children failures by the Tower Hamlets Council and other safeguarding duties, the police decided not to take any action. And that was not because of any reason that the police credibly provided for the refusal to take action against the perpetrators of criminal abuse and misuse of Tower Hamlets Council and its resources and the powers. And that includes the evidence that ordinary people, when they were asked by the BBC about the way that this former Poplar town hall was undersold, the people in the street gave emphatically critical opinion and condemned Tower Hamlets Council in effect. And that was the only occasion that this campaign has seen of any member of the ordinary public in Tower Hamlets being put on camera by the BBC or any other channel to comment on the concrete referenced item of the Poplar, the former Poplar town hall, and other abuses. Now, the details of the impact on the series of action libraries, action files, action data of all varieties that were affected by the criminals operating as Tower Hamlets Council employees in collusion with the criminals in the SSBA and other criminals. Those items can only be kind of valued at 1,000 times more valuable if monetary kind of measures are used than the divorce tourism that the Sunday Times, in its report on the Ahmedova claim against her husband and her son Timur, is representative of what has been going on. And what the actual admin kind of personnel in the High Court actually did, and what they based the content of the misleading and incorrect and false order about the 3 cases will be investigated, and those will be investigated by way of updates, because the basic information about the contents of the behavior of the High Court have already been stated many times. And in the context of that update, references will be made to the role of Niwam Council, Niwam Council's mayor, the Labour Party and others concerned, and the Niwam Council's monitoring officer and others involved, including a number of lying Niwam councillors. Their corresponding numbers in Tower Hamlets are like kind of the same way involved, implicated and involved. And what these items of reference in each particular confirms is what our campaign had been saying about Harmless Council, about New Harm Council, and about the criminals that have been bribed by the Lutfur Rahman regime, and which bribery cases were completely and unjustifiably not included in that way by the Price Waterhouse Cooper report. They do say one thing, which in context is misleading, and I'm about to say why. The Price Waterhouse Cooper report says that between this date and that date, during a particular period, Harmless Council, fronted by elected Mayor Lutfur Rahman, made grants available to a number of organizations. And Price Waterhouse Cooper says that all of them are Bangladeshis or Bengalis. And it says that there is no white or non-Bangladeshi kind of organization. The Somalis were included in the favored group, but that again points to the network, a de facto network that must have been kind of targeted for financial kind of grants by Tower Hamlets Council, as fronted by Lutfur Rahman as the elected mayor in post at the time, so-called. The so-called applies to the words elected mayor. The so-called doesn't apply to the bribery, abuse of power, abuse of position, and corruption of the council's resources by Lutfur Rahman or by others in his close proximity or close quarter circle operating the regime of the elected, so-called elected mayor Lutfur Rahman's period. And what has happened is that every single agency in Tower Hamlets, every single kind of recognizable agency in Tower Hamlets, including the personnel of the Metropolitan Police and the kind of employed, paid, supposedly neutral employees in Tower Hamlets Council's posts as directors and as equally highly paid incumbents in the various posts. They behaved either negligently, but persistently negligently against the rights of the people who had been violated, whose rights had been violated by the regime of Lutfur Rahman as the so-called elected mayor. So these constituted three types of law breaking. One is criminality, and the other two is contractual and common law wrongs. Now, in none of the investigations into the Lutfur Rahman years as the so-called elected mayor in post, did the so-called investigators refer to any of the treaties to which the United Kingdom as a country and its locally elected kind of agencies remain signed up and therefore are obliged to demonstrate, express consistent, unbiased, and timely compliance with the requirements of the treaties. But they have no mention of those. They have not mentioned any of the treaties and the requirements of the treaties to which the UK remains a signatory, and by definition are the local councils like Tower Hamlets and the judicial bureaucracy like the High Court and the Metropolitan Police, who are very much part of the British state, and the Charity Commission, which has been failing. The Charity Commission has been failing to provide the service for auditing and regulation of the perpetrator outfits that are registered charities that have been breaking the law and have been allowed to use themselves as instruments under license of charity, kind of registered charity body, that kind of name, instruments of criminality. And that role as the instrument of the criminality applies to the attacks on the Kitten's house. And then there is the licensed law trading outfits, not just the court system that is corrupt, but the licensed law trading outfits, that is the licensors or the licensing bodies for the licensed law traders, like the 4 Inns of Court for barristers and the Solicitors Regulation Authority for the Law Society and the solicitors. They have not complied. They have not complied with the requirements of the treaties. Now, the treaties, the treaty website that has been in existence for a while, according to the House of Commons Information Department, has got on its database about or more than 14,000 treaties going over a century or more. So nobody has raised the question about the illegal behavior, unconstitutional behavior by the Law Society, the Inns of Court, the High Court judicial bureaucracy, the judges in the county courts, or by the Metropolitan Police, or by the Greater London Authority, or by the London boroughs of Newham and Tower Hamlets. London boroughs of Newham Council and Tower Hamlets Council. So there appears to be increasing number of evidence containing materials that would exceed the number of 20,000 per device. And when multiplied by thousands of devices and storages, and I mean 1,000 literally, it will be exceeding, in strict number terms, the number of the 40 million pages that the British Library has confirmed it has got on digital kind of archives. So the viewer who is a new one should reflect on what we are comparing. That is the volume, that is the magnitude of the numbers of items. That is the beginning of the numbers of the part of the possessions, resources that have been attacked and included in the attacks by the organizations that we have symbolically and representatively mentioned. There are other organizations, including the banks and the banks regulating authority, so-called, and the BBC and the mainstream Fleet Street as well, that have been in breach or in serial breaches of their obligations to uphold the requirements and abide by the requirements of the treaties that have been signed over the last 100 years or so. The fact that the media do not acknowledge this, the fact that the British High Court and the lower courts and the prosecuting authority like the Crown Prosecution Service or any of the departments of central government or any of the select committees that actually exist in the House of Commons, because that is the kind of house that takes priority. Weirdly, it is called a bicameral chamber, so it is called the lower house, but essentially the power, constitutional power that is available and is exercised by the House of Commons is considerably higher and bigger and wider than the House of Peers. So what has happened in the evidence-based decades of action defending the community in the East End of London, defending the community from the East End of London, defending the wider humanity and wider communities as part of the de facto strategy in defense of the community in the East End of London. These are unique items of evidence, unique modes of evidence, unique styles and contents of evidence, and evidence that whose magnitude in terms of the impact on the local community and the individuals who created the evidence and the analysis and the narrative and the explanations, that would exceed the volume, the impact, the worth, the cost would exceed billions and billions and billions. And at every stage of the wrongdoing by the council or by the other criminal outfits that we've been mentioning, the targets of the attack applied emphatic, impeccable compliance with the requirements of due process, rule of law. And in response, or as in comparison with those compliances by the claimants, the behavior of the Tower Hamlets Council, fronted by the so-called elected mayor post-holder Lutfur Rahman, during those calendar 6 years, and the behavior of John Biggs, who came into incumbents on the 11th of June 2015 and remains incumbent up to this day and this time. The behavior of Hrs Council personnel operating during those two incumbents in the post of elected mayor, the behavior has been illegal, unlawful, criminal in every way. And so what is happening in relation to the archives, we have updated up to this point in short, but we have not updated the incidents of uncertainty created and caused by these criminals and criminal outlets and entities and individual criminal perpetrators and liars and crooks and thieves. Our campaign, our movement has been unique in creating, collecting, gathering, storing, promoting, taking forward the maximum types and varieties of evidence, original evidence of the original work. And we have been engaged in pursuing those aims throughout the decades. And simultaneously, as we have been doing the necessary investigation work and so on, we have been doing it without receiving a single penny from the public source, either council or the regional assembly or from any department in the central government. So the cost of borrowing, we have had to borrow a lot. The cost of borrowing plus the actual borrowed sums and the losses incurred in the process of borrowing must be added to the claims against these perpetrators, wrongdoers, and criminals and liars. And then there is the cost of unique varieties and numbers of intentionally created dislocation, covering at least, not final, but at least 20 separate locations for storing the unique resources over the period. It is recognized by independent research that the cost of moving home or the stress of moving home once is so far-reaching that it affects people's personal health irreparably. Now, multiply that by 20 times. And that can only be imagined, the impact on the health, welfare, and well-being. And then we add the effects on the children that were exposed to serious risk of abuse and harm. And then you add the actual experiences of the kittens. And you cannot begin. It is impossible to state even the basic facts of the damage and hurt and detriment and it is totally impossible to overstate any aspect of it. And then there is the list of additional work that we have carried out over the years and decades. Work that no licensed law trading firm would or could undertake, let alone complete with the outcome that we have done. Now, if the cost, just the cost of retaining David Penick's services or reputation for these cases and actions were used as the criteria or the measure, then in fees retention terms and in terms of the impact on the lives of the people who have benefited from our work and who have not paid the fees, they have not paid for the cost of the research, let alone the cost of the availability of the person to provide the service. If they are taken into account, it would run into hundreds of millions.